palace started locking doors, people should have started asking questions. Because when the future king of Britain is standing outside his own father's study and being denied access, this is no longer a family disagreement. This is no longer palace protocol. This is something much darker, something carefully hidden behind polished smiles, staged photographs, and official statements designed to make the public believe everything was perfectly under control. But what if the biggest royal power struggle wasn't happening in public at all? What if it was unfolding behind closed doors while the entire world was distracted by carefully scripted appearances? And what if King Charles himself had been watching it happen the entire time? Prince William stood in the corridor of Windsor Castle staring at a door that should never have been closed to him. The atmosphere inside the palace had changed. Everyone could feel it. Staff members suddenly avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when certain people entered the room. Schedules were altered. Meetings vanished. Access disappeared. And standing between William and his father was a palace aide named Sterling, a man whose silence suddenly felt more revealing than any answer he could possibly give. William wanted one simple thing: to see his father. Yet somehow, day after day, excuse after excuse appeared. The king was resting. The king was unavailable. The king needed privacy. The explanations sounded reasonable until people started noticing a pattern that became impossible to ignore. Think about it. This was not some distant relative asking for a meeting. This was the heir to the throne, the future king himself. Yet somehow, every road leading to Charles seemed blocked. Coincidence or construction? Because that's exactly what it looked like. A wall being built brick by brick, not with arguments, not with dramatic confrontations, but with schedules, restrictions, cancellations, and carefully controlled access. The kind of manipulation that hides in plain sight because it wears the disguise of responsibility. Then came the envelope. At exactly 7:14 in the evening, during a glamorous palace reception filled with smiles, handshakes, and crystal glasses, something happened that would change everything. A woman passed William carrying drinks. She didn't stop. She didn't speak. She didn't even make eye contact. Yet, moments later, there was something in his coat pocket that hadn't been there before. Just imagine the tension. Surrounded by hundreds of people, cameras everywhere, and yet someone was risking everything to get a message directly into the hands of the future king. William waited. He smiled for photographs. He greeted guests. He played his role perfectly. But the entire time, that envelope burned in his pocket like a secret waiting to explode. Hours later, alone in his private quarters, he finally opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 11 lines. That's all. 11 lines that reportedly described a document scheduled to be signed the very next morning. A document so explosive that, if completed, it would fundamentally reshape how power flowed through the monarchy. Suddenly, the strange behavior of the past 6 weeks didn't look random anymore. It looked coordinated, because strange things had been happening. A key royal briefing had been canceled at the last minute. William was already on his way when the call arrived. A respected royal photographer captured intimate images of Charles and William deep in conversation. Images showing trust, connection, and unity. Yet those photographs mysteriously vanished before publication. No explanation, no clarification, just silence. Then there was the dinner. A private dinner between father and son that wasn't private at all. William arrived expecting an opportunity to finally speak openly with Charles. Instead, another presence dominated the room. Every conversation seemed managed, every moment carefully supervised. Every opportunity for private discussion somehow disappeared. One palace insider later described the atmosphere with a phrase that sent chills through royal watchers. A supervised visit. Just let that sink in. A supervised visit between a king and his own heir. The more pieces emerged, the more disturbing the picture became. Because individually these incidents looked harmless. Together they formed something else entirely. Something systematic. Something intentional. Questions started multiplying. Who was controlling access to the king? Why were meetings being canceled? Why were photographs disappearing? Why was William being kept at arm's length? And most importantly, why did every road seem to lead back to the same circle of influence surrounding Charles? By the time William finished reading the anonymous document, one thing had become terrifyingly clear. Walking into the room and simply objecting wasn't going to work. The palace machine was too powerful, too established, too practiced at absorbing resistance. If he challenged it directly, the system would simply close ranks around itself. So instead of confronting the machine, William made a phone call. A very important phone call. One that would eventually lead him to a late-night meeting far away from palace eyes. Because somewhere else, another member of the royal family had been watching the exact same pattern emerge, watching the same doors close, watching the same barriers appear, watching the same pieces move across the board. And according to whispers spreading through royal circles, she had already discovered something shocking. Not only was a major transfer of authority being prepared behind the scenes, but there were rumors that King Charles himself might already have a completely different plan in motion. A plan that had been developing in absolute secrecy for weeks. The late-night meeting changed everything. When William arrived arrived, he expected answers. What he found instead was something far more unsettling, because the person waiting for him wasn't surprised. There was no shock, no confusion, no frantic reaction to the information hidden inside that mysterious envelope. Instead, there was a look that immediately raised a chilling possibility. What if the story unfolding inside Windsor Castle was even bigger than William realized? What if the battle everyone thought was about controlling access to the king was actually the final stage of a much larger plan that had already been set in motion weeks earlier? The conversation that followed reportedly shattered everything William thought he understood, because according to information quietly circulating behind palace walls, King Charles was not trapped. He was not confused. He was not being blindly manipulated. In fact, the possibility being whispered was almost impossible to believe. Charles may have allowed events to unfold intentionally. Every canceled meeting, every blocked conversation, every suspicious scheduling change, every strange restriction surrounding access to the monarch. What if he had been watching it all happen for a reason? Suddenly, the entire mystery looked different. Instead of a king losing control, the possibility emerged that Charles had been studying everyone around him, watching who moved where, watching who took initiative, watching who attempted to expand influence when they believed nobody was paying attention. And if that theory was true, then the next revelation was absolutely explosive. A secret legal instrument already existed. Not a proposal, not a draft, an actual document. One prepared in silence, one carrying the authority of the crown itself. And according to Palace Whispers, it had already been signed by Charles weeks earlier. The room reportedly fell silent when William learned what that document contained. Because while another arrangement was allegedly being prepared to expand control around the king, Charles had quietly authorized something completely different. Something that bypassed every advisor, every planner, every strategist, and every carefully built layer of influence. Instead of surrendering authority to those surrounding him, he had chosen a direct path. A path leading straight to his heir. Think about the timing. No dramatic speeches followed. No shouting. No explosive confrontation. Just the unmistakable reality that a decision had been made. A final decision. One that could not be reversed. And suddenly, the carefully constructed arrangement that had dominated palace life for weeks began collapsing. Meetings disappeared. Schedules changed. Documents lost relevance overnight. The machinery that had seemed unstoppable simply stopped moving. By sunrise, the atmosphere inside Windsor had transformed. Officials arrived expecting one reality and discovered another. Plans that seemed certain had evaporated. Assumptions that appeared secure no longer existed. The board itself had changed while players were still calculating their next move. And perhaps the most fascinating part of all is what happened afterward. No public war, no dramatic announcement, no emotional scenes, just silence. The kind of silence that tells experienced observers everything they need to know. Because sometimes the most powerful victory is the one that never needs to announce itself. Sometimes the loudest shockwave is the one nobody hears until it has already passed through the room. And according to the story whispered through royal circles, that is exactly what happened here. Yet one question still lingers. Was this truly the end of the struggle, or merely the moment the public finally caught a glimpse of a battle that had been unfolding in secret all along? Because if there is one thing history teaches about royal families, it is this: when doors close inside palaces, new ones are already opening somewhere else. And the most important chapters are often the ones nobody sees coming. The signatures may be complete, the decisions may be made, the balance of power may have shifted, but the silence that followed, that may be the biggest clue of all. Because in royal history, silence is rarely the end of the story. It is usually the beginning of the next one.